let's start with Mr. Herbstreit. I'm sure you were happy how the playoffs turned out this year, but what were your impressions of the first year?
I think it added some excitement to the sport this year. I think that having 4 teams hanging out there provided a lot of excitement. I think it opened up the opportunities. Obviously, when you go to 4 as opposed to just 2, and as it turned out, I mean, the championship would have been the 2 teams that made it in the playoff that didn't make it, as far as the winners are concerned. So you wouldn't have had the Ohio State matchup with Oregon. You would have had Florida State playing Alabama. So because of that, I think it worked the first year. It was, as far as we were concerned, you probably couldn't have asked for better matchups and intrigue. So is it perfect? No. Are people going to still be upset if we talk to TCU or Baylor? Of course. But I think next year we're going to have another 2 or 3 teams that will be upset about it. So I think even if you go to 8, you're still going to have teams that are going to be upset about the system. So I don't think it's ever going to be perfect.
And Mr. Fowler, what do you have to say to the TCU and Baylor fans in our fine state who are really ticked about all this?
I feel their pain. I think, as Kirk said, it's not going to be perfect. He had 6 teams who are worthy, trying to fit into 4 slots. That wasn't going to work. It made it easy to exclude the Big 12 because they didn't have a championship game and there was some confusion about who the true champion was. And also because I think that the way the committee chose the 4 teams, it was the most politically correct. You only offended 1 conference. Having said that, the committee's choices look great. In hindsight, Ohio State, the team that got that 4th position, ended up being a deserving champion. So they couldn't have been excluded. You're going to exclude an undefeated Florida State team. You're going to exclude Alabama or Oregon. So TCU went and repped themselves well in the bowl game, destroying a good Ole Miss team, and made a strong statement. Baylor didn't rep quite as well in the bowl game. They did for about 50 minutes of it. But I think that at the end of the day, TCU had a case that if they'd been in a playoff, they might have been as good as anybody in it. But you couldn't complain about the way the 4 teams moved through the bracket because it validated the committee, I think.
So, Mr. Herbstreit, what do you think are going to be the changes this year, if any, in the playoff system?
I don't think you'll see any. I think over time we might see some tweaks, but I don't really think you're going to see any. Oliver Luck is now off the committee, so maybe that'll be a little bit of a tweak or a change. But for the most part, I think what they had this first year, even though people, again, you're never going to have everybody agree to it, I think for the most part, the overwhelming majority were very pleased with the outcome and the way there's some flexibility and willingness to make some changes, which is very different from the traditional AP poll or the coaches poll that we've kind of just been used to. I personally really enjoyed the way teams, as the season went on, they moved up and down, and not just because it was Ohio State, but just because there was a willingness there from the committee not to say, well, we had them there last week, so we have to keep them there. They continued to look at the entire body of work, and they adjusted what they thought was right.
If you had one thing to change on the committee, Mr. Fowler, what would that be?
On the committee?
On the rules for a playoff.
Well, I want to see how the 4-team works for a while. I thought that an 8-team bracket makes sense if you eliminate perhaps the conference championship games. You can't just keep adding another tier of games and asking players to go out there week after week. I think you have to look at that very realistically. The wear and tear is a real issue. I wanted to see how the 4-team bracket would work. I want to see how it works for a few years. But we know there's never been a postseason format in any sport that hasn't expanded, whether it's pro or college, lower divisions in football, other sports. So the bracket creep, as they call it, will probably happen at some point, but I don't think for a while. I think the 4-team needs to be given a chance to work.
Last question. What about Texas and Oklahoma this year? Here, everybody's talking about TCU, Baylor, no Texas, no Oklahoma. What do you see in 2015 for those 2 teams?
Well, I think with Bob and Norman, I think he's made a lot of changes, which is new for him. He's had to let some people go and tweak some things and brought in a new offensive coordinator. So I'm anxious to see how that'll go for him. He's got more of a veteran team coming back. It's just been, I know Bob personally. I feel bad. My heart kind of goes out for him and what they've had to endure lately. As far as Texas, I personally think you're going to see continued improvement. I think Charlie Strong personally he's doing a great job. I think he basically had to get that program to hit rock bottom with a lot of the players he kicked off. The season didn't go the way any of them had hoped. They got to find a quarterback, let's be honest, if they're really going to be a player in the Big 12. But if they find that quarterback, I think the pieces around that position, up front, the skill positions, I think people are going to continue to be pleasantly surprised with their improvement over the next couple of years.